under the soft shimmer of dawn, when the first threads of pale light stretched over the tiled rooftops of Chong'an, the heart of the Tang dynasty, the city stirred in ways both quiet and vast, and though the streets were not yet filled with a cacophony of merchants, officials, monks, and travellers, something small yet momentous was beginning to ripple through its veins, as though a stone had been cast into an immense still pond. For it was on this morning that a boy no older than 14, barefoot and clutching a clay cup of steaming millet porridge, stumbled upon a caravan resting at the edge of the western gate, its camels groaning softly under the weight of bolts of shimmering silk, glazed ceramics, and bundles wrapped in strange-smelling hides. And while such caravans were not unfamiliar to Chong'an, this one was different because of the curious man who stood apart, dressed in garments stitched with threads the boy had never seen before, threads that glimmered faintly blue, even in the dull light of morning, and the man's hair, pale as barley, caught the sun in a way that made the boy stop mid-step, his porridge cooling in his hand, for he realized in that instant that the world was larger than he had ever dared to imagine, larger than the great avenues lined with mulberry trees, larger than the drum towers where soldiers called the hours, larger even than the endless walls of the palace whose golden roofs seemed to scrape the very sky. Here, at the western gate, stood proof that stories whispered in tea-houses about lands beyond the deserts and mountains were true, and that truth, shimmering like a thread of silk itself, was about to weave into his own life, though he did not yet know how. The boy's name was Li Wei, son of a candlemaker whose shop smelled of beeswax and smoke, and though his family's life was humble, marked by long hours of labor and the careful rationing of rice and pickled vegetables, his imagination soared far beyond the stalls of the Eastern market where he helped his father sell candles, for every evening, when his chores were done, he lingered at the tea-shop door to hear storytellers speak of the Silk Road, of caravans crossing burning sands, of monks carrying sutras bound in golden scrolls, of merchants who bartered jade for horses, of thieves and warriors, of lands where spices grew so fragrant they made one weep. And though these tales were meant to dazzle and earn the storyteller coins, to Li Wei they were not. Distant fantasies but living promises. So when he saw the pale-haired man step forward, exchanging words with the gate guards in broken Chinese, and when he caught a glimpse of small objects laid on a cloth, glass beads that gleamed like frozen raindrops, a carved ivory figure no bigger than his thumb, a pouch smelling faintly of cinnamon, he felt an unexplainable pull, as if the threads of fate had looped around his heart, tugging him closer. Yet he remained at a distance, too shy to speak, though his mind filled with questions. What land did this man come from? Did he ride across deserts where the stars blazed brighter than lanterns? Did he know emperors, priests, or kings unlike any in China? Li Wei would not ask, for the caravan was soon permitted through, its camels swaying, its bells tinkling softly, and the boy returned to his porridge, now cold, but his heart burned with something new, something that tasted like hunger though it was not for food, and that hunger would guide him for years to come. The city itself, Chong'an, was a world in miniature, with its 12 great gates, its markets divided by strict rules, its wide avenues patrolled by soldiers in lacquered armor, its neighborhoods buzzing with artisans, scholars, and peasants who carried baskets of cabbages and turnips, and every detail of daily life was alive with scents and textures. The sharp tang of vinegar used to pickle radishes, the sweet steam rising from rice cakes sold by old women crouched at the roadside, the rich musk of incense curling from temple doors where monks chanted sutras, the laughter of children chasing wooden hoops, the sharp cries of hawkers selling silk ribbons dyed with indigo and saffron, and among these rhythms Li Wei grew, his hands rough from helping his father mold candles, his ears tuned to the stories of travellers, his eyes restless whenever he glimpsed the caravans bound for the western deserts. At night, after supper of rice gruel with bean paste, he would lie on the straw mat, beside his younger sister, listening to the creak of the house settling in the night, and dream of far-off lands where the sky never darkened the same way twice. Yet for all the richness of the city, there was also a shadow, for the Silk Road was not merely a passage of trade but a corridor of danger. Stories told of bandits lurking in the mountains, of sandstorms swallowing entire caravans, of unscrupulous traders who cheated the young and gullible, and of sicknesses carried from one land to another like whispers in the wind. And though Li Wei's father warned him that wanderers often ended with broken bones and empty stomachs, the boy could not still the drumbeat in his chest, for he longed not for riches, but for the taste of a world larger than his narrow lane. It was in the evenings, when the candles flickered low and his father's hands trembled from long work, that Li Wei sometimes slipped away to the western gate, where guards changed shifts and shadows stretched long, to watch the caravans prepare, and on one such evening he caught the faint sound of a stringed instrument unlike the pipa or guqin he had heard at festivals. Its notes were sharp, metallic, yet hauntingly beautiful, and when he followed the sound, he found a traveller seated by a camel, plucking at a lute-like instrument with curved neck, and though the man sang in a language Li Wei could not understand, the emotion in the music struck him as deeply as hunger gnawing at his belly, and he thought to himself that perhaps the world was stitched together not only by silk and spices, but by songs and stories that leapt across deserts like sparks across kindling. As weeks passed, the boy began to recognize the rhythm of caravan life. The traders who bought grain and millet for the journey, the water sellers who filled clay jars, the blacksmiths who repaired camel bells, the women who sewed sturdy saddlebags, and he marveled at how the road bound together people of so many faces, Uyghurs with long braids, Persians with dark beards and bright eyes, Sogdian merchants with colorful robes, monks with shaven heads and serene smiles, each carrying a piece of the world into the city and leaving with another piece to take back, and though he could not yet join them, Li Wei felt he was already part of this vast weaving, invisible though his thread might be. One night, as the autumn air grew sharp and the smell of roasting chestnuts filled the lanes, Li Wei dreamt that he was walking alone across endless sands, his bare feet burning, yet above him the stars wheeled in patterns he had never seen, and from the horizon a caravan approached, its torches flickering like a procession of fireflies, and among them walked the pale-haired stranger, who beckoned him forward with a smile, and when Li Wei reached out, he awoke, his mat damp with sweat, his heart racing, the faint sound of a camel's bell still ringing in his ears. He did not yet know that dreams and waking life would soon blur, and that the small detail of a caravan at dawn had already set into motion a story greater than any he had ever heard. And so the first thread was woven. A boy, a city, a caravan, and the faint shimmer of something vast just beyond reach, waiting for the courage of small hands to grasp it. For the Silk Road was not merely a path of trade but a river of human longing, and Li Wei, though only a candlemaker's son, had already stepped into its current, though he had yet to realize where it might carry him, and as the moon rose above the palace roofs that night, silver light spilling like silk across the sleeping city, he whispered to himself that perhaps one day his footsteps too would echo beyond the gates of Chong'an, into deserts and mountains where stories were born anew, and though the city slept, his heart remained awake, carrying him toward a horizon that beckoned in silence, promising both wonder and peril in equal measure. When the following spring arrived, and the mulberry trees of Chong'an began to unfurl their pale green leaves, the city once again hummed with renewal, the air carrying both the fragrance of blossoms and the dust of restless caravans preparing to depart, and by then Li Wei had grown a little taller, his voice roughened at the edges, though his heart still beat with the same longing that had taken root when he first saw the pale-haired stranger at the western gate. For now, each sight of traders, bargaining for horses or measuring out sacks of grain, seemed like a silent invitation that pulled at him, and the pull grew stronger when he learned that the caravan master, a Sogdian known as Veras, was looking for young helpers to tend to the animals, fetch water, and keep the fires at night. Li Wei could scarcely breathe when he overheard the news while delivering candles to a stall near the western market, and though his father had always spoken firmly of the dangers of the road, insisting that their family's life was here among wax, wicks, and steady customers, Li Wei's mind was already racing with visions of deserts and mountains, of songs in unknown tongues, of treasures and perils alike. That night, as the household ate supper of rice and turnip stew, he could barely taste the food, for he was turning over in his head the question of whether he could dare ask his father's blessing or whether he must slip away in silence. And though he loved his family, the thought of missing the chance to step into the current of the Silk Road felt like a slow suffocation. His chance came unexpectedly, as many turning points in life often do, when a fire broke out in the southern district, consuming several homes built of bamboo and wood, and Li Wei and his father rushed with buckets to aid the neighbors, their hands blistered from the heat and their throats raw from smoke. When at last the flames were subdued, they returned exhausted to their candle shop, and as they sat in silence, watching the embers of their small hearth, Li Wei spoke haltingly, telling his father of the caravan seeking helpers, of his wish to see the world beyond the gates, of his promise to work hard and return one day with stories and perhaps even riches. His father listened without interruption, his lined face unreadable in the flickering light, and when at last he spoke, his voice was heavy with both sorrow and a strange pride, saying that while the road was dangerous, a candle's flame was meant to burn, not to hide, and that if Li Wei's flame yearned to light distant places, perhaps it was his duty to follow it, though he must carry with him not only courage but also memory of home. And so, with tears in his eyes, Li Wei's father gave him a pouch of copper coins, enough for simple provisions, and pressed into his hand a small beeswax candle, plain and unadorned, saying that wherever he went, this would remind him that light is fragile yet enduring, easily snuffed yet also capable of piercing the darkest road. The next dawn, Li Wei stood at the western gate, his bundle small, his heart trembling, as the caravan gathered, camels groaning, drivers shouting, the smell of hay, leather, and animal sweat mingling with the sweet smoke of incense offered at a roadside shrine. The caravan master Veras, a broad-shouldered man with keen eyes, inspected the boy with a mixture of skepticism and amusement, then, after testing his strength by having him lift a water jar, nodded curtly, declaring that the road itself would be the judge of whether Li Wei belonged, and thus, with no ceremony, the boy who had dreamed by candlelight found himself stepping beyond the familiar walls of Chong'an, into a world whose vastness he had only imagined. The first days were intoxicating, the rhythm of bells clanging from camel harnesses, the crunch of gravel beneath hooves, the changing faces of fellow travelers who spoke Chinese in broken phrases or not at all, their conversations lilting in Persian, Sogdian, or Turkic tones that rose and fell like music. Li Wei learned quickly to fetch water from wells, to tend to sore-footed animals, to cook simple millet gruel over smoky fires, and though the work was hard and the sun often burned mercilessly, his heart surged with the exhilaration of being part of something vast, as though each step of the caravan beat out the rhythm of destiny itself. Yet the further they travelled from Chong'an, the more he understood that wonder was always shadowed by hardship. By the time they crossed into the dry plains where the wind carried grit like knives, Li Wei's lips cracked from thirst, his muscles ached from lifting burdens, and food grew monotonous, consisting mostly of hard flatbread, dried apricots, and thin stews flavoured with too much salt. Still, he marvelled at the way people from different lands gathered at night around the fire, exchanging songs, stories, and fragments of language, and he found himself mimicking words, tasting them on his tongue, laughing when he mispronounced them, and learning slowly that communication was not only about words but about gestures, smiles, and shared bread. Yet dangers soon revealed themselves, for one evening, as the caravan skirted the foothills where bandits were rumoured to dwell, a group of riders appeared on the horizon, their silhouettes sharp against the reddening sky, and Veras immediately ordered the camels to be circled and fires doused, the traders standing guard with spears and bows, their faces tense. Li Wei crouched behind a bundle of silk, heart pounding, clutching the small candle his father had given him, and he realized in that moment that the Silk Road was not a romantic story told in tea-houses, but a living trial where safety could vanish as quickly as daylight. The riders did not attack that night, perhaps deterred by the caravan's numbers, yet the tension remained, like a wolf circling unseen. Still, life pressed forward. Mornings began with the call of drivers urging camels to rise, the smell of smoke clinging to clothing, the endless horizon stretching before them. Li Wei grew accustomed to the rhythm, his body hardening, his mind expanding with each new sight. Buddhist monasteries perched against cliffs, where monks with serene eyes offered water and advice. Market towns where spices filled the air so thickly that he sneezed uncontrollably. Oases where palm trees shimmered in the heat, offering sweet respite with their shade and fruit, and everywhere evidence of how cultures braided together. Persian rugs laid beside Chinese porcelain, Indian spices traded for steppe horses, Arabic songs mingled with Chinese flutes. Among his companions, Li Wei grew particularly close to a young man named Rustam, a Sogdian about 18 years old with quick wit and a fondness for telling tales of heroes who wrestled demons and courted queens. Rustum taught Li Wei words in his language, laughed at his clumsy attempts, and shared with him roasted almonds dipped in honey, which tasted to Li Wei like treasures greater than gold. In return, Li Wei shared fragments of Chinese poetry he had heard, and though Rustum could not understand the words, he nodded gravely, saying that the tone carried meaning enough, and so, by the fireside, they forged a friendship that made the long days less lonely. Yet the road tested them again when a sandstorm swept down without warning, the sky darkening, the wind screaming like 1,000 voices, grains of sand stinging skin and eyes, camels bellowing in panic. Li Wei clung to Rustum's arm as they struggled to hold onto the ropes, their mouths filled with grit, their bodies battered by the storm, and when at last it passed, they found several loads scattered and half-buried, their water jars cracked. Their provisions diminished. Exhaustion weighed heavy, and even Vera's stern face softened with worry, for the journey had only begun, and already the road demanded its toll. As days blurred into weeks, Li Wei's longing transformed into something deeper, not just hunger for adventure but a quiet awe at the resilience of those who travelled. Women carrying infants wrapped in cloth, old men limping beside camels, youths laughing despite weariness. And he began to sense that the Silk Road was not merely about goods but about the endurance of human spirit, the will to connect across distances that seemed impossible. Yet he also saw how greed and desperation lurked, as a merchant once tried to cheat a thirsty traveller by charging triple for water, sparking a shouting match that nearly turned to blows before Veras intervened, reminding all that survival depended on unity. One night, as they camped near an oasis where date palms swayed and the air smelled of sweet blossoms, Li Wei sat by the fire, turning the beeswax candle in his hand, and thought of home, of his father's weary face, his sister's laughter, the quiet streets of Chong'an, and he felt both an ache and a strange pride, as though by carrying his small light into the vast unknown, he honored them. Rustum, noticing his silence, asked what he held, and when Li Wei explained, Rustum nodded and said that every traveller carried such a flame, though not always in their hand, sometimes only in their heart, and that the road's true test was to keep it from being extinguished. Li Wei tucked the candle safely away, comforted yet also unsettled, for he knew the road still stretched endlessly westward, with deserts, mountains, and dangers yet unseen. And as the caravan prepared to press onward into lands where fewer spoke Chinese, where faiths and customs shifted like dunes in the wind, Li Wei lay awake beneath the stars, the vast sky pressing down upon him, and wondered what shape his own journey would take, whether he would survive, whether he would return, or whether the Silk Road would carry him so far that home became only a memory. The thought frightened him, yet also thrilled him, for within that uncertainty lay the very essence of what he had sought, and as sleep finally claimed him, the faint echo of camel bells seemed to promise that the greatest challenges and revelations were still to come. By the time the caravan reached the great expanse of the Gobi, where the earth seemed to stretch endlessly under a sky so wide it threatened to swallow the traveller's whole, Li Wei had grown leaner, his skin browned by sun and wind, his once boyish hands hardened into callous tools that could haul water skins, mend rope, or soothe a restless camel, and though the days blurred into a rhythm of footsteps and bells, each moment was sharpened by the awareness that a single mistake, an overturned jar, a wrong turn, a delay at the wrong place, could mean death. The desert was not like the plains or the foothills, where oases punctuated the days with respite, but an unyielding sea of stone and sand where the heat shimmered at noon like a cruel mirage and the cold at night cut into bones with the sharpness of a blade. Yet amidst this vastness, the caravan carried on, driven by need, greed, hope, and the simple instinct to endure. Li Wei learned quickly how to wrap his head in cloth to shield against the biting winds, how to ration water so that a single swallow could refresh the mouth without emptying the skin, how to chew on dried apricots slowly to trick his stomach into believing it was fuller than it was, and these lessons became part of him, as natural as breathing, for survival in the desert demanded no less. Still, he also learned that even in the harshest landscapes, life had its beauty, for at dawn the horizon glowed pink and gold, the camels' shadows long across the stones, and at night the stars burned brighter than any lantern, so close that he felt he could reach up and touch them, and sometimes, as he lay on his mat with the scent of dust and camel sweat still clinging to him, He thought of his father's candle and realized the flame within him was not alone, for the sky itself carried countless flames, each a reminder of worlds beyond. The caravan, however, was not only tested by the desert but also by the tempers and fears of men, for hunger and thirst gnawed at patience, and arguments broke out more often. A Persian trader accused a Turkic driver of stealing figs, 2 camel-keepers quarreled over the order of the beasts, and once even Verres himself, usually calm and commanding, struck a man who refused to share his water with an old woman. These moments showed Li Wei that survival on the Silk Road was not only about enduring the desert but about holding together a fragile community of strangers, bound by need more than trust, and he began to see how easily everything could unravel. His bond with Rustam grew stronger during these weeks, for hardship forged companionship more quickly than ease ever could, and the older youth took Li Wei under his wing, teaching him how to judge the direction of the wind, how to spot the faint trace of a caravan road half buried in sand, how to listen for the shift in a camel's breathing that meant exhaustion, and in turn, Li Wei shared with him fragments of his home, stories of Chong'an's lantern festivals when the streets glowed with color, of the taste of noodles pulled thin as threads, of the way the air smelled in summer when mulberry leaves were gathered for silkworms, and Rustam would close his eyes, as though savoring a vision of a place he might never see, while offering in exchange his own tales of Samarkand's turquoise domes and markets heavy with fruit. These shared dreams became a kind of food in themselves, sustaining them when their bellies ached with emptiness. Yet the road remained merciless. One afternoon, a camel collapsed, its legs folding beneath it, its burden spilling into the dust, and though the men tried to lift it, pouring water into its mouth, the beast did not rise, its eyes dulling as the heat beat down, and when Verres ordered the goods redistributed and the carcass left behind, Li Wei felt a pang of sorrow, for the creature had carried him through days of hardship, and he realized then how fragile all lives were upon this road, human or animal alike, each step balanced on the knife's edge of survival. That night, as the caravan rested under a sky still trembling from the heat of the day, Verres gathered them around and warned that the next stretch would be the harshest, with no oasis for 3 days, and that anyone who wasted water would bring ruin upon all. His words hung heavy, and Li Wei clutched his water-skin with new reverence, knowing it was more precious than jade or gold. On the 2nd day of this march, delirium began to set in, tongue swollen, feet blistered, eyes stinging with sand, and it was then that Li Wei caught sight of something on the horizon, a wavering shimmer that seemed to take the shape of trees, pools, and cool shade. His heart leapt, but Rustam's hand clamped his shoulder, steadying him, whispering that it was only a mirage, the desert's cruel trick, and Li Wei felt shame at how easily his hope had nearly betrayed him. Yet he also understood more deeply the strength it took to keep walking when the world itself tried to lure you into despair. At last, when the 3rd night came, and the caravan stumbled into a true oasis where palms grew tall and water glittered in the moonlight, the joy was overwhelming. People wept openly as they drank, splashed their faces, and lay in the cool sand, whispering prayers of gratitude, and Li Wei, as he knelt by the water, thought of his father's candle again, how it too was a small pool of light in surrounding darkness, and how sometimes survival was simply the stubborn choice to keep moving until relief arrived. Yet even in this haven shadows lingered, for a group of strangers appeared from the northern dunes, rough men with scarred faces and hard eyes, claiming to be traders seeking rest, yet Verres' gaze remained wary, and whispers spread through the camp that these were no merchants but outlaws waiting for their chance. Li Wei felt the tension rise like smoke, though no violence erupted that night, and he realized that danger wore many faces, sometimes masked in courtesy, sometimes in silence. As the caravan moved onward, leaving the oasis behind, Li Wei noticed how the landscape began to shift. Dunes gave way to rocky passes, winds carried scents of resin and pine, and the promise of mountains rose faintly against the horizon, their peaks like distant guardians. Here, the rhythm of the journey changed again, as villages appeared more often, their houses built of mud brick and stone, their people offering bowls of yogurt, flatbread, and sometimes dried mutton in exchange for silk, threads or Chinese coins, and Li Wei marveled at the variety of tongues, garments, and faces, realizing how the Silk Road was not a single path, but 1,000 threads weaving together cultures into a living tapestry. In one such village, he encountered a musician playing an instrument shaped like a pear with strings that rang sharp and mournful, and though the song's words were foreign, the melody drew a crowd, and Li Wei felt again the same stirring he had felt months ago when he first heard a foreign lute outside Chong'an, a reminder that music needed no translation, that it was the language of longing itself. Yet the road demanded its dark tribute once more when sickness swept the caravan. Fever, chills, coughing that racked bodies until they collapsed, and though some recovered after days of misery, others were buried hastily under cairns of stone, their names. The caravan wound its way through the jagged passes of the Tian Shan, where craggy peaks pierced the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast, and each morning Li Wei awoke to the scent of pine resin mingled with the cold tang of high-altitude air, his body aching in new ways from the climb, his hands stiff from gripping ropes and the reins of camels that balked at every slope. The travellers had grown accustomed to each other's rhythms. Vera's commanding voice, Rustam's easy laughter, the murmurs of women tending infants, the quiet sighs of the old men who had walked these routes for decades, and even the smallest gestures carried meaning, a shared glance over a steaming bowl of millet porridge or the passing of a water-skin without a word. For Li Wei, these small acts became a kind of map, guiding him through both the physical and social terrain, teaching him that survival was as much about understanding people as it was about enduring sun and stone. The mountains themselves were alive with sounds, the distant echo of a goat's bell bouncing down a valley, the whisper of wind curling around the peaks, the hollow crack of falling rocks, and at night the howls of wolves that prowled just beyond the reach of firelight. And though fear was never absent, Li Wei learned to listen, to interpret the music of the mountains, to sense when the air was heavy with snow or when a storm would tumble down with sudden fury. He came to understand that nature was both teacher and adversary, its lessons exacting yet indispensable. Among the caravan, cultural differences became ever more apparent. Uyghur traders with braided hair and embroidered vests argued animatedly with Sogdian merchants in long, flowing robes, while Persian cooks prepared saffron-infused rice beside Chinese noodles, and though at first Li Wei struggled to follow the chatter, he gradually began to pick up words, gestures, even subtle cues of respect and insult, and he marveled at the way humans could adapt and communicate across such chasms of tongue and custom, often finding laughter and camaraderie where he would have expected only conflict. One evening, when the sun dipped behind a jagged ridge and the shadows of camels stretched like black ink across the sand-strewn slopes, the caravan stopped at a narrow valley where a small stream bubbled clear and cold, and Li Wei watched the travellers congregate, some kneeling to wash their faces, some stretching tired limbs, others tending fires. It was here that he first tasted yogurt flavoured with honey and walnuts, offered by a local family who greeted the caravan with wary smiles, and the sweetness lingered on his tongue like a memory of something both foreign and comforting, a tangible sign of the unexpected gifts the road could bestow. Yet the mountains held perils beyond thirst and hunger, and it was during a particularly treacherous pass, where the path narrowed along a cliff's edge, that disaster nearly struck. A sudden rock-slide, loosened by a night's thaw, sent stones tumbling down toward the camels, and chaos erupted as animals reared and humans shouted, some scrambling to secure their loads, others attempting to save the stragglers. Li Wei, heart-hammering, seized Rustam's arm, pulling him behind a boulder just as a larger rock smashed into a camel's harness, sending silk bolts spilling into the dust, and when the danger passed, the caravan gathered what they could, counted the losses, and continued with an unspoken recognition that the road demanded vigilance at every step, that luck was a fragile commodity, and that each day survived was a gift. In these high passes, Li Wei also witnessed human kindness in its most raw and profound forms. An old Uyghur man who shared his meagre rations of dried meat with a child who had nothing, a Persian merchant who offered a warm cloak to a shivering camel driver, a Sogdian woman who sang softly to a frightened infant, and Li Wei learned that compassion was a currency as vital as coin, often keeping the body and spirit from breaking under the weight of the journey. He began to see that the Silk Road was not merely a network of trade, but a living organism of interconnected acts, small and large, that allowed life to persist in a world both beautiful and cruel. By the time the caravan descended toward the verdant valleys that marked the approach to the Pamir Plateau, Li Wei's mind and body had adapted to the rigors of the road. He could spot the tracks of wolves and foxes, knew the scent of distant rain, recognized the warning cries of birds that signaled approaching danger, and he had learned to measure his own limits, rationing strength as carefully as food and water. For exhaustion here could be fatal. Yet the true test came in the form of human threats, for word reached Veras that a band of mountain raiders had been sighted along the next pass, men known for ambushing isolated travelers and caravans alike, taking camels, silk, and gold with brutal efficiency. The caravan moved cautiously, scouts sent ahead to examine paths, and Li Wei, though afraid, felt a strange thrill, understanding that danger was the price of the road's promise, that the Silk Road had never been safe, and that courage was forged not in the absence of fear, but in the decision to continue despite it. One morning, as a cold wind swept down from the peaks, the scouts returned, bringing news that the raiders were indeed nearby, and Veras ordered the caravan to halt and take measures. Camels were corralled tightly, fires dimmed, and travelers huddled together, speaking in whispers and listening to the night, for the raiders were said to strike under the cover of darkness. Li Wei, lying beside Rustum, felt the weight of anticipation like a stone on his chest, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his father's candle, now dulled from travel but still capable of shedding a flicker of light, and he realized that this moment, more than any scorching sun or blistered foot, taught him the deepest lessons of vigilance, patience, and solidarity. In the quiet hours, the boy observed the men and women around him, a Uyghur driver murmuring prayers under his breath, a Persian woman adjusting a child's blanket, an old Sogdian recounting a tale of a caravan lost to the mountains decades ago, and he saw in each face the reflection of his own fears and hopes, the universal truth that no matter the language or origin, human beings were bound together by struggle, by the desire to endure, by the small, vital acts of care that allowed life to continue, and in this reflection, Li Wei's understanding of the Silk Road deepened, shifting from a mere path of commerce into a river of human experience, flowing with courage, folly, generosity, and grief. As the sun rose higher, casting jagged shadows across the valley, Veras moved among his people, giving orders, checking the camels, ensuring the path ahead was as safe as possible, and Li Wei followed closely, learning not only the physical logistics of survival but also the art of leadership, how to calm frightened travelers, how to distribute resources fairly, how to read the morale of a group and act accordingly. And he began to sense that mastery of the road required more than endurance. It required wisdom, patience, and a keen understanding of human nature. By the time the caravan reached the northern edge of the plateau, where the wind carried the smell of distant snow and the air was thin and sharp, Li Wei felt transformed. The boy who had left Chong'an with only a small bundle and a candle was now a young man of keen observation, steady hands, and resilient. The caravan pressed onward, leaving the bustling city behind as dawn painted the western horizon in shades of rose and gold, and Li Wei felt the familiar mixture of exhilaration and apprehension settle over him like a second skin, for beyond the stone walls and crowded streets lay a landscape both mesmerizing and merciless, where the Silk Road stretched across plains, rivers, and deserts that seemed endless, and every step carried the potential for discovery, fortune, or disaster. The camels moved with a steady rhythm, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that caught the light and created a haze through which the travellers' silhouettes flickered like shadows on a stage, and Li Wei, walking alongside Rustum, felt the pulse of the road in every sound, the bells on camel harnesses, the murmured exchanges of merchants, the distant cry of birds, the whisper of wind through grass and stone, and he knew that to survive, to thrive, he had to attune himself to every nuance, every subtle shift in sound, smell, and movement. The western deserts demanded new skills. Li Wei learned to estimate the distance to the next water source by the color of the sand and the flight of birds, to ration the limited shade of a lone rock or sparse tree, to keep both mind and body occupied against the monotony that could dull vigilance, and he discovered that even in this harsh, unrelenting landscape, beauty existed in fleeting glimpses, the shimmer of heat on the horizon, the delicate bloom of a desert flower, the way the sun set in, molten orange and purple, casting the world into silhouettes of staggering clarity. Nights in the desert were a stark contrast to the crowded city streets. The wind roared through the dunes, cold and dry, and the stars burned so intensely that Li Wei felt as though he could reach out and touch them, while the silence between each gust amplified every footstep, every cough, every movement of the camels. It was here, under this vast and indifferent sky, that he learned the rhythm of survival, the the quiet art of patience, and the resilience needed to endure not only the physical hardships but also the psychological strain of isolation and monotony, for even a single misstep in the dark could have fatal consequences. The caravan's cohesion was tested constantly. Arguments over rations flared, disputes over the order of travel erupted, and sometimes fear took the form of stubborn refusal. Yet in these moments, Li Wei observed Vera's skill as a leader, his ability to enforce rules without cruelty, to mediate disputes with a calm authority that commanded respect. And Li Wei realized that leadership on the Silk Road was as much about understanding human nature as it was about managing goods and camels. For the survival of the group depended upon unity, trust, and the careful balance of authority and empathy. In one particularly punishing stretch, where the dunes rose like frozen waves of gold, a sudden sandstorm struck without warning, reducing visibility to mere meters, battering the travelers with grit and wind that bit into exposed skin and stung eyes, and Li Wei found himself clinging to Rustum as they struggled to guide their camels along a path that vanished beneath the swirling sand. The chaos was deafening. Each shout carried away before it could reach its intended ear, and Li Wei's heart pounded with the raw fear of the desert's power. Yet when the storm passed, revealing a sky scrubbed clean and pale, a rainbow of dust and sunlight lingering on the horizon, he understood the fragile grace of survival, the exhilaration of endurance, and the profound awe inspired by forces far beyond human control. The human stories within the caravan became more vivid during these trials. An elderly couple who had been traveling for weeks, sharing stories of lost children and distant lands, their hands entwined in quiet defiance of hardship. A boy no older than Li Wei who insisted on helping with the camels despite blistered feet, his laughter a balm to weary adults. Women singing softly to soothe infants as the wind howled and the sand drifted over blankets, turning the campsite into a shifting, living sculpture of determination and tenderness. And Li Wei absorbed each tale, each gesture, each spark of resilience, realizing that the Silk Road was more than a path for commerce. It was a living chronicle of human courage, ingenuity, and the relentless drive to connect, survive, and endure. At one temporary oasis, a rare and precious haven of spring-fed water and palm shade, Li Wei witnessed a convergence of travelers from multiple directions. Merchants from Persia bartering for silk and spices, envoys from distant kingdoms seeking information and goods, scholars documenting plants, animals, and topography, and local herders offering milk and dates in exchange for coin or protection. And he marveled at how this single, unassuming point of water became a nexus of trade, culture, and human interaction, a living testament to the interconnectedness of peoples across continents. Within the caravan, relationships deepened under the pressure of constant movement and shared adversity. Rustum, whose calm strength had been a constant anchor, revealed fragments of his past, tales of family lost to famine and war, and Li Wei felt the depth of trust and empathy growing between them, for the road demanded not only physical endurance but emotional openness, the willingness to shoulder burdens alongside others, and to find strength in shared vulnerability. Yet the path remained perilous. Rumors of raiders along the next stretch spread quickly, their presence confirmed by tracks and discarded supplies found by scouts, and Vera's, ever vigilant, adjusted travel schedules to maximize safety, reinforcing camp defenses, and organizing scouts to circle ahead and flank the caravan if needed. Li Wei, though anxious, absorbed each lesson, noting how leadership, observation, and swift decision-making could mean the difference between life and death. And he understood that the road's danger was a constant teacher, sharpening skills and instincts in ways the comforts of a city never could. Cultural exchanges continued to enrich and challenge the travelers. Li Wei sampled new foods that teased and perplexed his palate, dried fruits coated with sugar and rosewater, meat stews spiced with cumin, coriander, and chili, teas blended with mint or saffron, and flatbreads baked on hot stones. Each taste a revelation, a lesson in the ingenuity of distant lands. He observed traders negotiating with gestures, numbers, and appeals to honor, noting how subtle differences in etiquette could shift the outcome of a deal, and how understanding the unspoken rules of each culture was as vital as the goods themselves. Nights in these desert expanses offered moments of reflection. Lying beneath an infinite sky, Li Wei watched the slow rotation of stars, listening to the soft breathing of camels, the whisper of wind over sand, the distant howl of desert wolves, and he thought of Chang'an, of his father's candle, of streets and gardens he might never see again, and he understood that the journey was transforming him in ways both profound and irreversible, that endurance, observation, and empathy were being carved into his very being with each passing day. One particularly long stretch tested the caravan's cohesion. The desert seemed endless, with water running low and temperatures swinging between punishing heat by day and biting cold by night, and Li Wei witnessed the strain on even the hardiest travelers, the old stumbling in the sand, the young crying from exhaustion, tempers fraying as frustration and fear mounted. But he also saw the best of human nature, those with strength sharing their water, those with knowledge guiding the weary, those with calm voices soothing panic, and he learned that survival depended upon the delicate balance of authority, cooperation, and compassion, each act a thread in a fragile web that held the group together. At the edge of a high plateau, the caravan paused, and Li Wei climbed a rocky outcrop to gaze westward. The landscape stretched endlessly, desert melting into rolling hills, mountains rising like silent sentinels, rivers glinting like silver threads far below, and he felt a shiver of awe at the vastness, at the multitude of lands, peoples, and stories awaiting beyond each ridge. In that moment, he recognized the Silk Road not merely as a route for commerce, but as a living artery of civilization, carrying the hopes, fears, and dreams of countless travelers across time and space. Yet with this realization came the sobering awareness of human fragility. Disease still lurked, raiders might strike without warning, camels could falter or die, and a single miscalculation could undo weeks of effort, reminding Li Wei that vigilance, endurance, and adaptability were not optional but essential, and that the true measure of a traveler was not merely the distance covered but the wisdom, empathy, and courage displayed along the way. In the evenings, as the caravan camped under vast starry skies, Li Wei found moments of quiet joy, the laughter of children chasing one another among dunes, the low hum of a lute played by a traveling musician, the aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked flatbreads, the gentle murmur of conversation blending languages into a unique cadence, and he understood that these small pleasures, these fragments of comfort and beauty, were as vital to survival as water and shade, sustaining body and spirit alike. By the time the caravan reached the fringes of the next desert, Li Wei had transformed from a boy of curiosity and timid hope into a young man of perception, endurance, and growing wisdom. He had learned to read landscapes and people alike, to value caution and courage in equal measure, to seek and offer compassion, and to recognize the fragile, fleeting moments of beauty that punctuated the road's harshness. And he understood that the Silk Road, in all its vastness, danger, and diversity, was shaping him into a witness, participant, and chronicler of human endeavor, each day a testament to resilience, connection, and the relentless pursuit of survival and understanding. And as the caravan prepared to descend into the next stretch, with wind rising and the scent of distant sand and spice filling the air, Li Wei stood at the crest of a dune, candle in hand, gazing westward into the horizon where lands unknown awaited, and felt the full weight and wonder of the journey ahead, knowing that the trials, encounters, and revelations of the Silk Road would continue to mold him, teaching lessons not only in survival and skill, but in the depth and complexity of human experience, and he understood, with a quiet thrill and solemn reverence, that the story of his travels was far from over, that every step forward carried the echoes of countless lives and countless choices, and that the road, endless and demanding, would reveal its greatest secrets only to those who walked it with patience, courage, and an open heart.